You are looking live.
Here comes the play. Goodman at the free throw line. Jumper.
He broke his ankles. He is Houdini.
Mickey Mantle don't care about you, so why should you care about him? Nobody cares.
That's not a good call. No.
You don't like that call.
I don't like that call.
Woo, 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 woo. Not so fast.
The Final Four, in case you have been living under a rock, the Final Four is Duke, Carolina, Kansas, and Villanova. And yes, Duke will be playing Carolina. And I don't know about anybody else, but I know that after Duke won over Arkansas, and then Carolina won over St. Peter's, a lot of people were saying, wait a minute, hold on. Duke's going to play Carolina in the Final Four in Coach K's last year. Something seems a little fishy. And yeah, that's a little weird, isn't it, how that really plays out? Just a little bit of a coincidence there, isn't it? That's just a little something, huh? Is it a coincidence? I'm not really sure. I couldn't quite tell you if that's truly a coincidence or if there's something else going on. I don't want to speculate that, the NCAA is, fixing games or whatever. That's kind of a crazy thing to say. But a lot of people were like, well, wait a minute. This seems a little odd how, Carolina and Duke are going to play in the Final Four in Coach K's last year. Little odd. Yeah. I could understand that. But Carolina and Duke, on the other hand, this is nuts, right? I mean, think about this. Carolina Duke, one of the most storied, one of the absolutely, I guess you could make an argument that it is the best rivalry in not only college basketball but all of sports as well. I don't really know that I would agree with that, but I've definitely heard some other people say that. So, a huge rivalry. For those of you that are not huge basketball fans, if you're into football, Bears, Packers is a huge rivalry. Ravens, Steelers is a huge rivalry. Any huge rivalry is, just the hatred between the two teams. More so the fan base of the teams. You don't really necessarily go out there and play each other and just, hate them. Obviously, you want to beat them with all your heart. But all I'm trying to say is an absolute, just a great game. It's crazy for Final Four. It's nuts. It's unexplainable how crazy that will be. This is interesting to think from both sides. Obviously, we've mentioned Coach K's last game, right? Or last season, I should say, not last game. Carolina's hoping it'll be his last game, but Duke looking to continue the Coach K farewell tour, and take it into the championship game on Saturday. So Carolina, though, and we'll get to this in a little bit later on a top 10 segment later tonight. Carolina in Hubert Davis's first year. How about that? Gets to the Final Four in his first year, and getting to the Final Four, a huge stage anyway. But how about the fact that his first Final Four as a head coach is going to be against Duke? You'd be under pressure anyway, being in your first Final Four. In your first Final Four, regardless, right? If it was your first Final Four, maybe in your 5th season of coaching, whatever. But to be in your first Final Four in your first season, that is absolutely nuts. And you're playing Duke, your arch rival, your arch nemesis. That's crazy. So you'd have to imagine that the pressure would be on Carolina and Hubert Davis. But I'm looking at this matchup, and it is very different from how I may have looked at this matchup if it were 2 months ago. And what I mean by that is 2 months ago, Duke was just doing its thing. They were beating teams. They were just doing what Duke does. And Carolina was really inconsistent, up and down. They would beat teams that they should. They would beat the bottom feeders, but then middle of the pack teams and top teams, they struggled. I mean, immensely against. It wasn't happening. That has shifted completely. Duke is the one that has now been. Both teams are in the Final Four, right? So they have obviously both earned it. It's not like a bad team gets to the Final Four. But Carolina, as I mentioned, up and down roller coaster season, very inconsistent in the regular season. And this tournament, I mean, what else can you say other than they figured it out at the right time? They've gotten things going their way. They figured it out. They are thriving right now, without a doubt. And, you know, they absolutely crushed Marquette in the first round. They were up 25 against Baylor. Baylor tried to claw back. Carolina slammed the door on in their face. Carolina goes to the Sweet 16. They take on UCLA. UCLA was a team looking to repeat their Final Four run, or make a repeat of a Final Four run after they did that last year. This time, UCLA was on the radar more so than last year. Carolina takes care of them with Caleb Love's 27 points in the second half. And then Carolina plays the Cinderella of the year St. Peter's in the Elite Eight. And it all caught up to St. Peter's, and Carolina just absolutely demolishes them. They win by 20. And, you know, I understand that, you know, maybe Marquette and St. Peter's are not necessarily top-tier teams. You know, maybe you play those teams in the middle of the season, and they're looked at as teams that maybe Carolina should beat. Though I don't know that really applies to Marquette. I think Marquette was really a middle-of-the-pack team, such as, you know, a team like, say, Wake Forest or Miami or Virginia Tech, right? Looking at them in terms of middle of the regular season. Carolina would have struggled against those teams, probably would have taken care of St. Peter's. And then, you know, Baylor and UCLA, if you were to match Baylor and UCLA up against Carolina in the regular season, I'm fairly confident that Baylor and UCLA would have won comfortably, right? Just based on the pace and based on how how Carolina was playing in the regular season, you know, based on how they're, you know, how they went. As I mentioned, they played well against teams they should beat, and then when it was a big test, they struggled. That's where they fell. Looking at this, I mean, Carolina has won every game. Well, I don't know. The Baylor game, they really, you know, messed that opportunity up. But, you know, if they had kept that lead against Baylor, they would have beaten, I believe, every team in the tournament so far by more than 10 points. I believe they beat UCLA by 11 or 9. It was close to that 10-point range, but you get the point. Like, they have not been, with the exception of the Baylor game, they have not had, like, a buzzer-beating win, a 2-point victory. They weren't, you know, not by a skin-of-their-teeth type of win very often. In comes Duke, which will be, again, not just a test because they're a number 2 seed, but because it's Duke and you're Carolina. I mean, it's David versus Goliath. It is a matchup for the ages. Not to mention it's the Final Four as well, which makes it, you know, 10 times more important for each side. And then on the other side, yeah, that guy, Coach K, Mike Krzyzewski, you know, he hasn't been too bad in his career. Not really sure what he's done, but he's, you know, won a couple thousand games or something like that, right? And, oh, by the way, it's his last season, right? So that's pretty important. Yeah, Duke's looking to go to the championship and win it all and send Coach K out the right way. And I would say about 90% of the country is hoping that Coach K loses to Carolina on Saturday. At least I am. And you look at Duke, and going into the tournament, I wasn't so confident that they could get to the Final Four because of how they fared to end the season in the regular season, and then how they fared in the ACC tournament. You know, they played a very just not too great style of game. You know what I mean? Like the last home game against Carolina crushed them. I mean, just absolutely slammed the door on them. Then in comes the ACC tournament. As I've mentioned this, you know, pretty much every week for the past few weeks. They struggled against Syracuse, struggled against Miami, struggled against then they ultimately lost to Virginia Tech in the ACC final. And then they get as a in the tournament they go as a 2 seed. They play 15 seed Cal State Fullerton. Yeah, all right, they took care of business against them. They were expected to. Not every 15 seed is going to go to the Elite Eight like St. Peter's, right? So you were expected to take care of business against Cal State Fullerton, and they did. Then they go play Michigan State. They win by a slim 1 point. And as I've mentioned before, Michigan State always a team that you have to look out for come tournament time. But, still, you're the number 2 seed. Maybe, there were definitely points in that game where it looked like Michigan State could have won that game. And maybe a few times where maybe the, refs gave them an advantage. I don't know, maybe, possibly. And so, yeah, little bit of some controversy there in the moment of that game, but they win. Texas Tech, the Red Raiders came so close to sending Duke home. Duke ultimately comes out on top with a strong finish to the second half, to regulation. Then Arkansas, a team that, nobody was really sure what to think about them. They played 2 double-digit seeds. They barely won. Then they knock off top overall seed Gonzaga. And then everybody thought, well, wait a minute, Arkansas could beat Duke now. Arkansas had Duke on the ropes. And then Duke, once again, late in the game, they prevailed and they got the job done. So, yeah, pretty important stuff there for Duke. Now they got Carolina, and as if Michigan State, Texas Tech, and Arkansas didn't give them enough trouble and didn't give them all they could handle as it was already, Carolina's coming in and saying, man, can you imagine if we're the team to send Duke home on Coach K's last season? That every time Carolina and Duke play, it's like, oh, this is for all the bragging rights, right? This is for all the marbles. Every time they play. I don't know if there's a bigger Carolina-Duke game than in the NCAA tournament, in the Final Four, Coach K's last season. If Carolina wins, that's bragging rights for a very long time. Every time you talk about Duke, Carolina, it's going to be, well, remember when they were the team to knock Coach K out of the tournament in his final year? Yeah, I remember that. That was a good time, right? Every time you talk about Duke, Carolina, that's going to get brought up. And if Duke beats Carolina, then it's going to be, well, hey, Carolina came in, they tried, but we won that game. You couldn't do it. This is bragging rights for the ages. And, I just talked a lot about Duke, Carolina, what that rivalry means, how this huge rivalry will come into play in a Final Four game on Coach K's last season. And yet there's a whole nother Final Four game. There's a Kansas-Villanova game that's going to also tip off on Saturday as well. So let's not forget about that.